When a routine traffic stop becomes a career-changing moment, a police officer's worst assumptions clash with a truth he never expected. The man he's about to question is the one who unknowingly holds his future. The sun was beginning to set over the streets of Sacramento, casting warm shades of gold and amber across the sky. Eric Porter was heading home after a long day at work. His sedan moved along smoothly, the air conditioning humming softly as he adjusted it, hoping to relax and leave the day behind. The radio played quietly, a comforting sound against the steady rhythm of the city. As he neared an intersection, Eric eased up on the gas pedal, slowing as the light turned yellow, then red. That's when flashing red and blue lights lit up behind him, followed by the loud wail of a police siren. Eric looked into his rearview mirror, his eyebrows tightening in concern. He calmly pulled over and rolled down his window, waiting as a police cruiser came to a stop behind him. Officer Bradley Larson stepped out. He looked to be in his mid-30s, with a sharp buzz cut and a polished badge catching the last rays of sunlight. Larson tugged at his belt as he made his way over, walking like someone who was used to calling the shots. "License and registration," he said, his voice firm and to the point. Eric didn't say a word. He calmly reached into his glove box, pulled out his registration, and handed over his driver's license. He moved with quiet control, though he could feel Larson's eyes locked on him, watching closely, maybe looking for a reason to ask more questions. "Do you know why I stopped you?" Larson asked, leaning slightly into the open window. "I'm not exactly sure," Eric replied, staying calm and respectful. "You didn't come to a full stop at the light," Larson said, though there was the slightest pause in his voice, like he wasn't fully convinced himself. Eric's brow furrowed a little, but he gave a small nod. "I thought I slowed down enough, but I understand." Larson didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood there, staring at Eric a little longer than expected. His eyes narrowed, studying him with a deeper intensity. This didn't feel like a simple traffic stop anymore, at least not to Larson. His stance shifted slightly, almost like something had changed in his mind. He seemed to have decided this situation was no longer just about a traffic signal. The officer glanced at the license in his hand. "You're not local, are you?" he asked. Eric paused just briefly before responding. "I moved here a few months ago. The address is on my license." But Officer Larson didn't seem to care much about the answer. His tone was starting to shift, not aggressive but with a certain edge that made it clear this wasn't just about a stoplight anymore. Eric stayed calm, but he could tell something had changed in the officer's attitude. Larson leaned a bit closer. "Where were you headed in such a hurry?" "Just heading home," Eric said, keeping his voice even. Still, the energy between them was different now. Tense. Larson no longer saw Eric as just another driver. There was something else in his eyes, a flicker of suspicion. Even though Eric had done nothing wrong, Eric picked up on it right away. But he didn't react. What Larson took for passiveness was really something else, control. And things were just getting started. Larson stepped back, folding up Eric's documents slowly, almost theatrically, before slipping them into his chest pocket. He straightened his posture, his face showing the faintest smirk, like he'd already made a judgment about the man sitting in front of him. "Step out of the car for me," Larson said. Eric's fingers tightened for a moment around the steering wheel, but he didn't let any emotion show on his face. "Is there a particular reason for that, officer?" he asked, voice calm and steady. Larson's mouth twitched slightly. Maybe annoyance, maybe satisfaction, but he hid it just as quickly. "I asked you to step out of the car," he repeated. "You don't want to make this more difficult than it needs to be." The warning was clear, even though it hadn't been spoken directly. Eric let out a slow breath, then opened the door. As he stepped out, Larson's eyes scanned him quickly, assessing. Eric stood slightly taller than the officer. His build was solid, but his presence was calm, not aggressive. The suit he wore was neatly pressed, his shoes polished, the look of someone organized, professional, and put together, but none of that seemed to register with Larson. "Hands where I can see them," he said, motioning toward the front of the car. Eric followed the instruction without hesitation. His movements were steady and intentional. "Is there something specific you're looking for?" he asked, his tone calm. Officer Larson gave a slight smirk. "Just routine. We've had a few incidents in the area. Can't be too careful." Eric turned his head just enough to meet Larson's eyes. "Incidents involving men in business suits driving sedans?" Or is this really about something else? Question hit hard. For a split second, Larson's confident look faded. He stood up straighter, his hand casually drifting toward his belt, more out of habit than any real need. "Watch your tone," he warned, his voice stiffening. "I'm simply asking a question," Eric said, voice steady. There was no attitude, no challenge, just quiet confidence. Something about that seemed to rattle Larson more than anger ever could. Larson leaned in, narrowing his eyes. "You seem pretty familiar with how this all works. Got something to hide?" Eric paused before answering, letting the silence fill the space for a moment. "No, officer. I just believe it's fair to ask why something like this is happening. Clarity and transparency, that's all." Larson let out a short scoff but didn't respond right away. He took a step back, slowly pacing in a small loop near the front of the car. Something about the interaction was beginning to shift. Eric wasn't reacting the way most people did. No signs of fear. No nervous movements. No shaky voice. Instead, he showed calm control, a presence that was beginning to throw Larson off balance. "You're pretty confident," Larson muttered under his breath. "Like you already know how this is going to end." Eric didn't bite. He simply tilted his head slightly. "This isn't about confidence, officer. It's about respect." Larson froze for a second. The smirk was gone now, replaced by something sharper, more defensive. He started to speak, but the words caught in his throat. Eric's calm presence was starting to get under his skin as the silence dragged on, the tension between them thickened. Larson was beginning to understand this wasn't going to go the way he expected. Till he wasn't about to step back. If anything, he dug in deeper. He tapped his fingers lightly against the holster on his belt, frustration simmering just beneath the surface. He wasn't used to being questioned, especially not by someone like Eric. Larson's eyes drifted to the sedan as if searching for something, anything, to justify what came next. "Turn around and place your hands on the hood," he said sharply. "I need to check for weapons." Eric raised an eyebrow. "Weapons?" he repeated, surprised but still composed. "Do I look like someone who's carrying a weapon?" Larson's jaw tensed, and for a moment his mask slipped. "I'm not going to ask you again," he said, voice clipped. Eric paused, and something unreadable passed over his face. But he didn't argue. Without saying a word, he turned and placed both hands firmly on the hood of the car. Larson moved in, the sound of his boots crunching against the pavement filling the silence. The officer began to pat him down, fast, rough, and more forceful than necessary. It wasn't just a search, it was about control. An attempt to trigger something. To push Eric into reacting, but Eric didn't move. He didn't stiffen. He didn't even flinch under Larson's invasive pressure. He stayed still, calm, grounded, and unshaken. "You're clean," Larson muttered as he stepped back. The words didn't sound like relief, more like frustration. It was clear he didn't like that he hadn't found anything to back up his suspicion. Eric turned around to face him. His expression stayed calm, but there was a sharpness in his eyes. "Of course I am," he said plainly. "Now, officer, if we're finished here." "I'm not done," Larson cut in, his voice rising just a bit. The words came out fast, almost rushed, like he was trying to grab hold of the situation before it slipped away. "You seem to know a lot about what I can and can't do," Larson added. "Care to explain why?" Eric crossed his arms. His posture was relaxed, even with the tension hanging thick between them. "I've had more than a few run-ins with law enforcement," he said. "Let's just say I've picked up a thing or two over the years." Larson's eyes narrowed. "That's so? You a lawyer or something?" Eric gave a slight smile. "Or something." That vague answer seemed to annoy Larson even more. He stepped closer, now standing right in Eric's space, his voice lowering to a near growl. "Look, you think you're smarter than me? Think you can talk your way out of this?" Eric didn't back down. His eyes held steady. "I'm not trying to outsmart anyone, officer. I just believe in being treated fairly. And right now, I'm not seeing much of that." His words landed hard. They weren't loud, but they had weight. And Larson couldn't let it go. "Fairness?" he scoffed. You think this is about fairness? He started to say more, people like you always, then stopped himself mid-sentence. Even though the rest of the words never left his mouth, the meaning was clear. Eric didn't react at first, but something in the way he stood changed, just slightly. He'd heard the part Larson didn't say, and he wasn't going to let it slide. People like me? Eric repeated, his voice low but pointed. Larson took a step back, almost as if he realized he'd gone too far. You know what I mean, he muttered, though now his tone lacked the edge it had before. I think I do, Eric said quietly. Only now his calmness wasn't gentle, it was direct, razor-sharp. There was no room for doubt. And I think we both know this stopped being about a traffic stop a while ago. Larson opened his mouth like he was going to respond, but nothing came out. For the first time, he didn't look sure of himself. He seemed caught off guard, unsure of what to say or do next. The power dynamic was shifting, and Larson felt it, but the moment that would change everything hadn't happened yet. Then Eric spoke, cutting through the silence with steady, clear words. Officer, I think it's time you knew who I am. Larson's brow furrowed, the irritation quickly returning. I don't care who you are, he snapped. Though his words said otherwise, the faint crack in Larson's tone gave him away. Eric slowly reached into his pocket, his movements careful and deliberate. I'm reaching for my badge, he said evenly, keeping his eyes on Larson. He noticed the officer's hand twitch near his holster. There's no need for theatrics. I just want you to see it. The words lingered in the air, heavy with an unspoken weight. Larson's gaze locked onto Eric's hand as he pulled out a sleek leather wallet. Flipping it open, Eric revealed a polished badge that gleamed in the fading light. Eric Porter, he said, his tone calm and unassuming, like he was introducing himself to a new neighbor. Head of Internal Affairs, Sacramento Division. Larson froze. His eyes darted from the badge to Eric's face, searching for any hint of a joke. But Eric wasn't smiling. There was no humor, only quiet authority tinged with disappointment. Internal Affairs? Larson echoed, his voice cracking slightly. Yes, Eric replied, cutting him off before he could stumble further. I oversee officer conduct. My job is to make sure that those who wear this badge honor the integrity and values it stands for. Larson's face lost its color. Confidence he had worn so proudly was unraveling, and fast. He took an unsteady step back, his hand dropping from his belt like the weight of his authority had suddenly grown unbearable. Eric stepped forward, closing the space Larson had instinctively created. Do you know what's most concerning about this interaction, Officer Larson? Eric asked, his tone calm but piercing. Larson didn't respond. He looked like a man who had just realized he'd walked into quicksand and couldn't see a way out. It's not the profiling, Eric continued, his voice measured but unwavering. Though that's unacceptable in itself. It's not even the unnecessary escalation. No, Eric went on, his eyes fixed on Larson's, sharp and unrelenting. It's the fact that you've done all of this without a second thought about who you were dealing with. Larson opened his mouth as if to reply, but nothing came out. You assumed I didn't know my rights, Eric said, his voice growing firmer. That I wouldn't understand the very laws you're supposed to enforce. And why is that? Larson remained silent, his composure now completely shattered. Eric's gaze didn't waver, pinning him in place. Because I didn't fit your idea of someone who deserves respect, Eric said, finishing the thought Larson had left hanging. He didn't raise his voice, but his words hit hard. They came with the weight of truth. And that's not just an issue for me, officer, he continued. That's a problem for every person you deal with while wearing that badge. Larson's shoulders dropped slightly as the meaning sank in. He looked down at Eric's badge again, almost like he hoped it wasn't real if he didn't look too closely. Eric took a small step back, giving Larson a bit of space, but his tone remained firm. Here's what's going to happen, he said. You're going to step back, give me back my documents, and think carefully before you say anything else. Larson opened his mouth, hesitating. He seemed torn. Part of him wanted to argue, but the moment had shifted. He was no longer in control. That brief pause cost him, then Eric added, his voice a little lower but even more serious. You're going to hear from me again, but next time not as the driver you pulled over. Next time I'll be the one deciding if you're fit to wear that badge. Larson's face turned red. He swallowed hard, fully realizing who he was dealing with now. With hands slightly shaky, he reached into his chest pocket and pulled out Eric's license and registration. He handed them over without a word. Eric took them calmly and tucked them back into his wallet. He walked to the driver's side of his car and placed a hand on the door handle. Before getting in, he turned and looked Larson in the eye one last time. "Remember this, Officer Larson," Eric said. "The badge doesn't make you better than anyone. It makes you accountable to everyone." Then Eric got into his car and started the engine. Larson stood alone in the dimming light, visibly shaken. His self-assurance had faded, and his future in law enforcement now hung in the balance. But for Eric, this wasn't the end. Not even close. His next steps would have lasting effects throughout the department. The ride home was quiet, but Eric's mind was racing. He kept replaying the traffic stop, not because it was rare, but because it wasn't. Larson wasn't the first officer Eric had come across like this. And he knew he wouldn't be the last, but this time was different. This time, Eric had the authority to do something about it. The next morning, Eric sat at his desk at the Sacramento Police Department's Internal Affairs Division. The early sunlight streamed through the blinds, lighting up the room. In front of him was an open file. It was labeled, Officer Bradley Larson. The file wasn't spotless. There were earlier complaints, unprofessional behavior, too many unnecessary stops, and vague misunderstandings that had never been seriously addressed. Eric leaned back in his chair, pressing his fingertips together in thought. He wasn't just thinking about Larson, he was thinking about the larger picture, because Larson wasn't an exception. Larson wasn't the whole problem, he was just a sign of something deeper. And Eric Porter had no intention of just covering it up or ignoring it. A quiet knock on the office door pulled him out of his thoughts. His assistant, Linda, walked in holding a stack of reports. "Good morning, Mr. Porter," she said. "I've got the summary from last month's misconduct cases. Also, Chief Daniels asked me to remind you about the department review next week." Eric nodded, taking the papers from her hands. "Thanks, Linda. And can you set up a meeting with Chief Daniels for this afternoon? There's something important I need to go over with him." Linda paused for a second, picking up on the seriousness in his voice. "Of course," she said softly before stepping out of the room. Eric glanced down at Larson's file again. But his mind wasn't just on Larson. This wasn't about one officer or one bad traffic stop. This was about the system. The environment that made someone like Larson think that behavior like his was normal, or even acceptable. And if there was one thing Eric understood clearly, it was this. Culture comes from the top. That afternoon, Eric sat in a quiet conference room across from Chief Daniels. A man known for his sharp instincts, silver-streaked hair, and straight-to-the-point attitude. Daniels leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, listening closely as Eric explained what had happened during the traffic stop. "I could have let it slide," Eric said, keeping his tone even but firm. "I could have walked away and chalked it up to just another unpleasant stop. But that would have been a mistake. Larson's actions aren't random. They show us how far we still have to go." Daniels sighed and rubbed his temples. "This isn't the first time Larson's name has come across my desk," he admitted. "We've addressed it in the past, quietly, internally." "And that's exactly the problem," Eric replied. "Quiet doesn't solve anything. Quiet is what lets this keep happening. We need to stop whispering about it. It's time to speak up." Daniels looked at Eric, clearly taking in the seriousness of the moment. "What are you suggesting?" he asked. "A full department review," Eric said without skipping a beat. "Not just a look at individual officers. We need to review our training, our procedures, how we handle complaints, and how we hold people accountable. If we don't raise our own standards, how can we ask the community to believe in us?" Daniels leaned forward, lacing his fingers together on the table. "You're going to upset some people with this," he said. "Good," Eric replied. "It's about time someone did," Eric said simply. The following weeks were a blur of meetings, interviews, and reports. Eric worked relentlessly, gathering data, talking to officers, and holding public forums to hear directly from the community. The incident with Larson became a turning point. Pushed the department to finally face its flaws. Head on. As for Larson, he faced an internal hearing. Eric didn't hide his involvement, sitting right across from Larson during the proceedings, watching as the officer shifted uncomfortably under the pressure. The outcome was a suspension for Larson, but Eric knew that the real success wasn't about punishing one officer. It was about stopping the next Larson before it happened. Months later, Eric stood at a podium during a community event, speaking to a room full of officers, city officials, and local residents. He didn't talk about blame. Instead, he spoke about responsibility, about the shared duty to build a system that worked for everyone. His message wasn't just a call for accountability, it was a promise of change. Justice isn't just about catching the bad guys, Eric said, his voice carrying across the hall. It's about ensuring the people sworn to protect and serve do so with integrity, fairness, and respect for everyone they come across. That's the badge I believe in. And that's the badge we're building here together. The applause was loud and overwhelming, but Eric didn't let it stop him. For him, this wasn't the end, it was the start of something better. As he stepped down from the podium, Eric scanned the faces in the crowd. Some were skeptical, others hopeful, but all were paying attention. He knew change wouldn't come all at once, but it would come. And for now, that was enough. If this story resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Let's start the important conversations, the ones that lead to real change. Subscribe to our channel for more stories like this, stories that challenge us, inspire us, and remind us of what we can achieve when we stand up for what's right.